Welcome to Bottom Up Prosperity. Just got a haircut yesterday, so I'm looking quite mean looking. Just thought I'd do a quick video talking about the end of the mask mandates here in New Zealand. So yeah, it's interesting. So as you may be aware, if you're watching this overseas at all, or you'll obviously be aware if you live in New Zealand, we had a mask mandate due to COVID-19. So the COVID response in New Zealand was a mixed one. In 2020, Jacinda Ardern's government was lauded internationally for its COVID response, followed the standard lockdowns, and then in 2021, it brought in vaccine mandates, which were quite controversial, and also vaccine passports. This is when the Delta strain got into New Zealand. So at the time, we later found out that the Ministry of Health gave the government three options. One was more laissez-faire, letting businesses decide whether they let people into their venue without being vaccinated or not. A second option, which was for large events, such as Rhythm and Vines, which was an annual, more of a New Year's event, that where the risk would be higher that there'd be viruses spreading around, close contact, and so have you. And the third option, which was all bars, cafes, libraries, pretty much a lot of public places that weren't anything that basically wasn't an essential service, you'd need to show a vaccine passport, so you'd have to download it. The Ministry of Health recommended that they go with the second, more moderate option, but the government, Jacinda Ardern's government, decided to go with the more extreme one, and then she gave a speech saying, if you want to go to a cafe, get vaccinated. If you want a haircut, get vaccinated. So it was kind of like, it went from being talking about the dry science and saying, okay, there's a risk that if you're not vaccinated, blah, 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 the science backs it up. We just have to do this. We don't want to do it. It did it in a kind of a way where it went socio-political as opposed to health-based policy. And of course, there were vaccine mandates for healthcare workers, all school teachers in New Zealand, blah, blah, blah. And that caused a lot of controversy. And of course, in February this year, they had a major protest at Parliament, and progressively the government's popularity went down in the polls. I actually think there's a correlation, but regardless of what you think of vaccines and all that stuff, what happened with the pandemic, I think there was a correlation between their policy of being too dystopian or authoritarian, or however you want to term it, and the drop in the political polls. And so this year, throughout Europe and America and pretty much most of the world, a lot of places removed COVID restrictions, whereas New Zealand was one of the last places, and of course there was a lot of discontent. You go on social media and there was always criticism in the comment section on Facebook, etc. And finally, as the numbers came down, in New Zealand's case, there was a so-called flu season, or colds and flu season, because it's winter. It was winter in the southern hemisphere when it was summer, obviously, in the northern hemisphere. And of course, the government and the Ministry of Health, I presume, with its advice, said keep the so-called restrictions in place, which used a so-called traffic light system. We were at orange, so we were kind of in limbo, and of course there were a lot of calls to eventually go to green or get rid of it. And finally, in the last couple of weeks, the government has removed all restrictions for COVID-19, accepting that you must wear masks if you go to a healthcare facility or aged care facility, which kind of comes with the territory. Obviously, there's a lot of debate over the necessity of it. If you were doing it properly, you'd want if you were following that, you'd want to use a high quality N95 proper mask as opposed to a rubbish one, because it would have less effect. And of course, there will be some testings coming into the country from overseas for new strains or whatever, which kind of fits in with standard health policy, kind of. So yeah, so anyway, a little bit of background about myself in terms of what some people would say, oh, you're not a scientist, how can you comment on that? Well, I was a political scientist. I studied political science at Victoria University in the late 90s, and also public policy, so I do know a little bit of what I talk about. This government, regardless of what you think of them, has in the past used kind of highly political kind of ways of doing things. So it went from being very open and transparent in 2020, where they started saying gaslighting, as some would say, or skewing the message, or taking too political approach to their response, where they would shift the goalposts, would always shift. So in 2020, they came out and said, well, we went to our first lockdown because the health system wouldn't be able to cope. And then, of course, as the numbers came down and as it became more common and more people had it, they continued a lot of restrictions, and then they always changed the narrative around, and that, and it's protect the vulnerable, immune compromised people, blah, blah, blah. But a year or two ago, if you were making a video like this, you'd probably get banned off Facebook or your video would be taken down. But now it's a bit more relaxed. This is not a video disputing vaccines or anything like that. It's just a quick comment telling you how it is in New Zealand at the moment. So you don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to wear a mask at work anymore. If you want to, that's fine. It's the way it should be. You should be free to basically put one on if you want. But if you were doing that, you've got to keep in mind, as those extra strains became more transmissible, i.e. more contagious, obviously weaker than the prior original strain of that virus, it would go through mask coverings and that, like the actual particles. So it mainly would stop you from sneezing huge amounts, so it would reduce, but it won't prevent you from COVID. And also it's still contaminated, contagious, when you touch surfaces and your nose and all that stuff. So interesting times we live in, but things generally have gone back to normal a little bit. There's local body elections on throughout New Zealand, like city councils and mayors and public body, local bodies, etc., community boards, and next year's the general election, so I might make some political commentary next year. But in terms of relevancy to the this channel, things are flowing okay again. So yeah, just a quick chat about the COOF, or Conan 19, or Chad 19, or however you want to phrase it, to get around the algorithm. So yeah, so hopefully this video gets up okay, and yeah, just a quick word on that, and cheers.